I was sitting in the notary's office, my fingers clutching the armrest of the chair so tightly, my nails dug into the leather. The air smelled of old paper and polished wood, and the clock on the wall ticked in agonizingly slow intervals, marking the moment my world would collapse. I had spent years taking care of our parents, years of hospital visits, financial strain, and nights filled with exhaustion. I had expected fairness, justice. Instead, I was about to receive a gut punch I never saw coming. And the entirety of the estate, including the downtown apartment, is left to Trevor Reeves. I blinked. The words didn't make sense. The notary's voice continued, but I couldn't hear anything beyond the pounding in my ears. What? My voice came out in a whisper. The notary, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, merely adjusted his papers and repeated himself. Your parents have left the apartment, along with any remaining assets, to your brother, Trevor Reeves. I turned to Trevor. He sat beside me, legs crossed, hands resting loosely on his knee. Calm, detached, as if this were all a formality, something he had expected. His expression didn't change. They left me. Nothing? My voice wavered. The notary flipped a page. Their accounts were emptied before their passing. Unfortunately, the remaining debts fall under your name, Ms. Reeves' debts. Not just nothing. Less than nothing. Trevor finally spoke, his voice smooth, almost amused. Tough luck, Kel. I stared at him, my chest tightening. You knew. It wasn't a question. He tilted his head, a smirk barely touching his lips. Of course I knew. A slow, sinking realization washed over me. He had known. He had sat through those months of my struggle, had let me carry the burden of caring for them, knowing full well that at the end of it all, I would be left with scraps. No, worse. A pile of unpaid bills. Why didn't you tell me? My voice trembled, but not with sadness, with rage. Trevor shrugged. You've always been naive, Kel. Our parents knew exactly what they were doing. Number something was wrong. My parents weren't cruel. They weren't perfect. But they wouldn't have done this. Not to me. Not after everything I had sacrificed. I clenched my fists as the notary wrapped up the formalities. The papers were signed, the legalities cemented. Trevor stood, stretching as if this had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Well, this was fun, he said, reaching for his coat. I'll be moving in next week. You'll want to make sure you're out of there by then. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. As he walked out, I felt the walls closing in around me. But something inside me refused to accept this. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The way he used to sound when he knew he had the upper hand, when he thought everything was a joke, when the world was his playground and everyone else was just a pawn. I could feel the old resentment bubbling to the surface again, mixing with the gnawing sense of unease that had been plaguing me for weeks. Could it be possible that Trevor had somehow found a way out of prison, that he was playing me again, manipulating me from behind bars? No. That didn't make sense. How could he? I ran my hands through my hair, pacing back and forth in the living room. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and every logical conclusion seemed to slip through my fingers. Maybe it wasn't him at all. Maybe it was someone else, someone trying to mess with me. But who would do that? And why? Then, my mind caught on something. A small detail that hadn't registered until now. The echo in the background of the call. It sounded like it came from somewhere big, an open space. Prison cells weren't open spaces. They were small, confined. So why would there be an echo? I took a deep breath and forced myself to think. My instincts were telling me something wasn't right, but I needed proof. I couldn't let myself be swept up in paranoia. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for any possible way that Trevor could have made that call from a place outside of prison. Was there any chance he had orchestrated an escape? Or was someone else involved? I spent the next few hours digging, researching everything I could about prison escapes, how calls were monitored, and who had access to those systems. The more I researched, the more unsettling the possibilities became. And just as I was about to close my laptop in frustration, a news headline caught my eye. High-profile inmate escape sparks investigation. My heart sank. The article detailed a recent breakout at the state prison where Trevor was being held. It was a highly orchestrated escape, involving several inmates. And most shockingly, it had happened just days before I had received that call. The words swirled in my mind as I stared at the screen, the weight of it crashing over me. Trevor had escaped. He had somehow managed to get out. And now he was free. But why had he contacted me? What did he want? To gloat? To intimidate? Or was there something more? I needed to act. I couldn't sit here, paralyzed by fear. Trevor was dangerous, and now that he was out, I had no idea what lengths he would go to get what he wanted. I knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't rest until he had everything he thought was owed to him. And he would come after me. The thought made my blood run cold. I had won the battle for the inheritance, but this was war. I grabbed my phone and dialed Margaret's number, my fingers trembling. She answered on the third ring, her voice steady but concerned. "Kelly, what's going on? You sound—" "Trevor's escaped," I said, my voice sharp, cutting her off. "What?" Her voice turned serious instantly. "How do you know?" "I just saw the news. He called me. Last night." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "It was him. I'm sure of it." There was a long pause. Then Margaret's voice came back, quieter. "We need to get ahead of this. He's dangerous, Kelly. You can't wait for him to come to you. I'll contact the authorities, but you need to be ready. Do you have a plan?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "I don't know. I'm scared, Margaret. He's out there, and he knows where I am. He's not done with me yet." "You can't let fear control you," she replied, her tone firm but gentle. "This is exactly what he wants. He thrives on it. You need to think clearly. Keep your distance. We'll get him, but we need to play this smart. Keep your phone charged. I'll help you stay ahead of this." I didn't say anything for a moment. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I was terrified. Trevor had never been someone I could outrun, not when he had this much time to plan, this much freedom. I set the phone down slowly, my mind racing with all the possibilities. He was out there, and somehow he'd found a way to reach me. And this time, I had no idea how to stop him. I could feel the walls closing in again. That night, I sat in my tiny, cluttered apartment, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to taunt me. The dim glow of my laptop screen cast eerie shadows on the walls, but my mind wasn't on the overdue notices or the mounting debt collector's threats. It was on the will, on Trevor's smug face, on the way he had sat there, completely unfazed, while my world crumbled around me. My parents weren't cruel people. Imperfect. Yes, distant at times. Sure, but not cruel. And certainly not the kind to leave me drowning while handing Trevor everything on a silver platter. Something didn't add up. I opened my parents' email accounts. Ones I had helped them set up years ago when they still struggled with technology. The passwords were old, predictable. My mother had never been one for security. I scrolled through months of messages, searching for anything related to their estate. Bank statements, legal correspondence, anything. And then I found it. An email from a lawyer, one I didn't recognize, dated just 3 months before their accident. The subject line made my stomach turn. Updated will. Finalized. Updated. I clicked on it, my pulse pounding. The email contained a PDF attachment. I opened it with shaky fingers, my eyes scanning the document. It was a will. Not the one I had seen today, but a different version. One where everything had been split evenly. I stared at the page, my breath catching in my throat. The signatures at the bottom, the ones that were supposed to be my parents', looked wrong. Something about them felt off, unnatural. And then it hit me. My mother's signature had always been a fluid, looping scrawl. She had signed my school permission slips, birthday cards, even the occasional check. But here, her signature was stiff, almost shaky, as if someone had tried to copy it, tried to forge it. My stomach churned. Trevor. I shut my laptop and pressed my hands against my temples. My mind raced, filling in the gaps. If this was real, if this forged will had somehow replaced the original, then Trevor had known all along. He hadn't just accepted the inheritance. He had orchestrated it. I needed help. Margaret. I grabbed my phone and called her. She picked up on the second ring. Kelly, I think my brother forged my parents' will. My voice was tight, controlled, but I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface. A pause. Then, her voice sharpened. Come to my office first thing in the morning. Bring everything. I didn't sleep that night. I was done playing the victim. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I sat in Margaret's office, my fingers drumming against the manila folder containing every document I had managed to dig up. My stomach twisted with anxiety as she flipped through the papers, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. Margaret had always been a no-nonsense kind of woman. She was the only person I trusted to handle something like this. And judging by the way her expression darkened as she examined the forged will, I knew I had been right to come to her. This signature, she muttered, running her finger along my mother's name. It's wrong. I swallowed hard. I knew it. She exhaled sharply, closing the folder. If this is a forgery, then your brother has committed fraud on a serious level. But proving it? She tapped the papers. We'll need a forensic analyst to examine these signatures. If they confirm forgery, we have grounds for a lawsuit. Lawsuit. The word sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about righting a wrong anymore. It was about war. Trevor won't go down without a fight, I murmured. Margaret's lips curled into a tight smile. Then let's make sure we hit first. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, expert consultations, and sleepless nights. Every step I took felt like walking on a tightrope. The forensic analyst confirmed what I already knew. The signatures were fake. My mother's real signature, taken from older documents, showed a clear difference in handwriting. That was all I needed. Margaret wasted no time filing a lawsuit. Trevor received the court notice within days. I expected a phone call, an email, some kind of response. Instead, he showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled, his jaw clenched. There was no smirk this time, no amusement, just pure, simmering anger. What the hell do you think you're doing, Kelly? His voice was low, dangerous. I crossed my arms, my heart pounding. Getting back what's mine? His eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. No, Trevor. You made the mistake when you forged that will. He let out a sharp breath, stepping closer. You think you can win this? You think some court ruling will change anything? I held my ground. Yes. A muscle in his jaw twitched. For the first time, I saw something beneath his anger. Not confidence, not arrogance, fear. He knew he was losing. Trevor leaned in, lowering his voice. Drop the case, Kelly. Walk away now, and maybe, just maybe, I won't destroy you. I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then I did something he didn't expect. I laughed, not out of humor, out of sheer, unwavering defiance. "You already destroyed me, Trevor," I whispered. "Now it's my turn." His eyes burned with hatred, but he said nothing, just turned on his heel and walked away. I watched him go, my fists clenched. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about justice. And I wasn't backing down. The court proceedings began a month later. I had spent weeks preparing, digging through every record, every bank statement, every scrap of evidence that could prove Trevor had manipulated our parents before their deaths. Margaret was relentless. She knew exactly where to apply pressure, which documents to subpoena, which loopholes to close before Trevor could slither through them. Trevor, for his part, played his role well. He walked into the courtroom with his usual air of arrogance, dressed in a sleek, custom-tailored suit, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. But there was something different this time. Beneath the polished exterior, I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. The forensic expert took the stand first. His testimony was a nail in Trevor's coffin. "These signatures," the expert explained, pointing to the comparison slides projected on the courtroom screen, "exhibit clear discrepancies. The loops in Mrs. Reeves's handwriting are inconsistent with her historical signatures. The pressure of the pen strokes is also unnatural, indicative of someone tracing a signature rather than writing it freely." Margaret nodded, flipping through her notes. "So, in your professional opinion, was this will signed by my client's mother?" The expert's answer was firm. "No, it was not." I glanced at Trevor. His jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack, but the real moment of reckoning came when Margaret presented the bank records. Trevor had been sloppy. The transactions showed that just a week before our parents' deaths, a significant sum of money had been transferred from their account to his. Margaret turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we believe this was a calculated effort to strip the deceased of their assets before the fraudulent will could take effect. Mr. Reeves not only forged legal documents, but he also financially manipulated his own parents for personal gain." The judge's gaze was heavy as he looked at Trevor. "Mr. Reeves, do you have a response to these allegations?" Trevor, for the first time, looked unsure. He opened his mouth, but no smooth, carefully crafted excuse came out. Just silence. It was over. The judge ruled in my favor. The fraudulent will was declared invalid. The estate, the apartment, the remaining assets, was returned to me. Trevor, on the other hand, wasn't just losing the inheritance. He was facing criminal charges. As the bailiffs approached him, his mask of composure finally cracked. He turned to me, his eyes burning with fury. "I hope you're happy now, Kelly." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "I am." And I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning. I was free. 6 months later, I stood by the window of my new apartment, the very one Trevor had tried to steal from me. The city skyline stretched before me, glittering against the dark night. I should have felt victorious, triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. I had won, but at what cost? My brother was gone, whether through his own doing or mine. It didn't matter. The weight of betrayal, of everything we had lost, lingered in the walls of this place. Justice had been served, but justice didn't heal wounds, and some wounds never truly fade. The apartment felt too big, too empty. I had fought so hard for this place, poured every ounce of my rage, my grief, my sense of betrayal into reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. The walls still smelled like fresh paint from the minor renovations I'd done, but it couldn't erase the feeling that this had once been my parents' home. A home I had barely set foot in while they were alive, too caught up in my career, assuming there would always be time later. There was no later. And Trevor. I ran my fingers along the cool glass of the window, looking out over the city. He was in prison now, serving time for fraud and forgery. Margaret had warned me that the legal process would be long, but the evidence had been overwhelming. He didn't stand a chance. His arrogance had been his downfall. He had underestimated me, assumed I would roll over like I always had. But I hadn't, and I'd won. So why did it feel so empty? I thought back to that last look he had given me, the way his eyes, once so full of smug confidence, had burned with hatred. I wondered if there had ever been a version of our lives where things had turned out differently, a version where we had fought side by side instead of against each other, a version where we had mourned our parents together instead of being ripped apart by greed. But that world didn't exist. I walked through the apartment, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I had replaced most of the furniture. Trevor had taken everything he could before the trial, leaving the place barren. But no matter how much I changed, I couldn't erase the ghosts of what had happened. I stopped in front of a small box sitting on the kitchen counter. It was the last thing I had from our parents, the only thing the lawyers hadn't needed for evidence, their personal effects, collected from the accident. I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, there were only a few items. My mother's watch, still frozen at the time of impact. My father's reading glasses, the frame slightly bent. A set of keys that no longer had a home to open. And at the very bottom, a letter. I frowned, carefully unfolding it. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged. It wasn't recent. It had been written months before their deaths, and it was addressed to me. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the words. My dearest Kelly, I know you and your brother don't always see eye to eye, but I need you to promise me something. If anything ever happens to us, don't let the past divide you. I know Trevor can be difficult, so stubborn, so sure of himself, but he's still your brother. We love you both, more than anything, and we just want you to remember that family should never be about who gets what. It should be about who you have left. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding. They had no idea what Trevor had done. No idea he had betrayed me before they were even gone. They had still believed in him, believed in us, in something that had never really existed. I folded the letter back up with trembling fingers, my vision blurring. They were wrong. Family wasn't about who you had left. It was about who you could trust. And Trevor had made his choice. I just had to live with it. Days turned into weeks, and the apartment still didn't feel like home. It was mine, legally, physically, but emotionally it was a hollow shell, filled with echoes of the past I couldn't silence. I tried. I repainted the walls, bought new furniture, even got a rug that was nothing like the one my parents had. But no matter how much I changed, the memories clung to the place like dust in the corners. Margaret told me I needed to move on. You won, she had said over coffee one morning, her tone gentle but firm. Trevor got what he deserved. It's over, Kelly. But it wasn't over. Winning didn't erase the years of resentment. It didn't fix the fact that I had spent my life believing my parents would do the right thing, only to learn, too late, that they hadn't. And then there was the letter. I kept reading it, over and over, trying to understand how they could have been so blind, how they could have written those words, believing Trevor and I could ever be anything other than enemies. Had they really not seen what he was? Or had they chosen not to? One evening, unable to shake the weight of it, I pulled out my laptop and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since the trial ended. I looked him up. Trevor Reeves, inmate number 52409. Fraud, forgery, financial crimes. Estimated parole hearing, 5 years. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. 5 years. It didn't seem like enough, not for what he had done. And yet, a part of me, one I hated, felt something else. Something uncomfortable. Guilt. I shut the laptop with a sharp snap. Number Trevor had done this to himself. He had lied, stolen, forged documents to take everything from me. He had never cared about fairness, about family, about anyone but himself. He deserved this. Didn't he? I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the unease settling in my bones. But even as I walked away, I couldn't ignore the thought whispering in the back of my mind. Had I really won? Or had I just lost differently? The days blurred into each other, a monotonous cycle of work, sleepless nights, and half-eaten meals. The apartment, my apartment, felt more like a museum exhibit than a home, as if I were merely a visitor in a place meant for someone else. I tried to force myself to settle in, to own it, but the walls seemed to resist me. Then came the nightmares. They started a few weeks after I looked up Trevor's prison records. At first, they were just flashes. Papers rustling in the wind. My mother's signature disappearing from the will. Trevor's smirk as he walked out of the notary's office with everything. But soon they grew more vivid. I dream of being in that courtroom again. Of watching Trevor get led away in handcuffs. Only this time, he would turn around and say something that made my blood freeze. "You think this is over? It's never over." I'd wake up gasping, my heart hammering, convinced for a split second that I'd find him standing at the foot of my bed. I told myself it was just my subconscious processing everything, that even though Trevor was locked away, my mind hadn't caught up yet. But the feeling lingered, that uneasy, crawling sensation at the base of my spine, like I had missed something. Then, one night, I got the call. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I groggily reached for it, barely registering the number. An unknown one. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then, a breath. A slow, deliberate odd exhale. I sat up straight, my fingers gripping the phone. "Who is this?" Still no answer. But I could hear Mao at something. In the background, a faint echo like someone was in a large, empty room. Then, just before the line went dead, I heard it. A low, rasping chuckle. My stomach dropped. I knew that laugh. Trevor. But that was impossible. He was in a prison. Wasn't he? My fingers went numb, and the phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the hardwood floor. I stared at the device, my breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of the impossible. There was no way it could be him. The call had come from a blocked number, but it didn't make sense. Trevor was behind bars, where he should have been, locked away in a cell that was supposed to be his new reality. I took a shaky breath and picked up the phone again, staring at the screen. My heart thudded in my chest, and for a moment, I considered calling the police. But what would I even tell them? That I had received a strange phone call, and the voice on the other end sounded like my brother. That sounded like something straight out of a bad thriller, not real life. But it wasn't just the voice. It was the tone, that chilling, mocking laugh. It had felt like Trevor, the way he used to sound when he knew he had the upper hand, when he thought everything was a joke, when the world was his playground and everyone else was just a pawn. I could feel the old resentment bubbling to the surface again, mixing with the gnawing sense of unease that had been plaguing me for weeks. Could it be possible that Trevor had somehow found a way out of prison, that he was playing me again, manipulating me from behind bars? No. That didn't make sense. How could he? I ran my hands through my hair, pacing back and forth in the living room. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and every logical conclusion seemed to slip through my fingers. Maybe it wasn't him at all. Maybe it was someone else, someone trying to mess with me. But who would do that? And why? Then, my mind caught on something. A small detail that hadn't registered until now. The echo in the background of the call. It sounded like it came from somewhere big. An open space. Prison cells weren't open spaces. They were small. Confined. So why would there be an echo? I took a deep breath and forced myself to think. My instincts were telling me something wasn't right, but I needed proof. I couldn't let myself be swept up in paranoia. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for any possible way that Trevor could have made that call from a place outside of prison. Was there any chance he had orchestrated an escape? Or was someone else involved? I spent the next few hours digging, researching everything I could about prison escapes, how calls were monitored, and who had access to those systems. The more I researched, the more unsettling the possibilities became. And just as I was about to close my laptop in frustration, a news headline caught my eye. High-profile inmate escape sparks investigation. My heart sank. The article detailed a recent breakout at the state prison where Trevor was being held. It was a highly orchestrated escape, involving several inmates. And most shockingly, it had happened just days before I had received that call. The words swirled in my mind as I stared at the screen, the weight of it crashing over me. Trevor had escaped. He had somehow managed to get out. And now he was free. But why had he contacted me? What did he want? To gloat? To intimidate? Or was there something more? I needed to act. I couldn't sit here, paralyzed by fear. Trevor was dangerous, and now that he was out, I had no idea what lengths he would go to get what he wanted. I knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't rest until he had everything he thought was owed to him. And he would come after me. The thought made my blood run cold. I had won the battle for the inheritance, but this was war. I grabbed my phone and dialed Margaret's number, my fingers trembling. She answered on the third ring, her voice steady but concerned. "Kelly, what's going on? You sound—" "Trevor's escaped," I said, my voice sharp, cutting her off. "What?" Her voice turned serious instantly. "How do you know?" "I just saw the news. He called me. Last night." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "It was him. I'm sure of it." There was a long pause. Then Margaret's voice came back, quieter. "We need to get ahead of this. He's dangerous, Kelly. You can't wait for him to come to you. I'll contact the authorities, but you need to be ready. Do you have a plan?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "I don't know. I'm scared, Margaret. He's out there, and he knows where I am. He's not done with me yet." "You can't let fear control you," she replied, her tone firm but gentle. "This is exactly what he wants. He thrives on it. You need to think clearly. Keep your distance. We'll get him, but we need to play this smart. Keep your phone charged. I'll help you stay ahead of this." I didn't say anything for a moment. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I was terrified. Trevor had never been someone I could outrun, not when he had this much time to plan, this much freedom. I set the phone down slowly, my mind racing with all the possibilities. He was out there, and somehow he'd found a way to reach me. And this time, I had no idea how to stop him. I could feel the walls closing in again. The next few days were a blur of tension, fear, and sleepless nights. Margaret had set up a few safety measures for me. Security cameras, alarms, and even a panic room, just in case things escalated further. But despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I scanned the streets for any sign of movement, any familiar face that might belong to Trevor. I told myself it was irrational. He was probably somewhere far away trying to lay low, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The fact that he had contacted me so soon after escaping meant he was already planning something, and that something likely had me in his sights. I kept replaying that phone call in my mind, the low chuckle that sent a chill down my spine, the way his voice had slid through the line with a quiet menace. Trevor had always been the one to control the situation, to make sure everyone else was playing by his rules. Even behind bars, he had still managed to pull the strings, using his connections, his charm, his ability to manipulate anyone around him. Now, though, it was clear he was coming after me. He wasn't done with me yet. I was jolted from my thoughts when the doorbell rang one afternoon. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I had been home alone, working from my couch, when I heard the sound. I didn't move. The bell rang again, louder this time. My eyes darted toward the peephole, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. No one was supposed to visit me. Not now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and slowly moved closer to the door. I peeked through the small hole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, his back to the door, looking down at something in his hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and for a split second he reminded me of Trevor. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't him. I wasn't sure if I should feel relief or dread. Whoever this was, he had no business being here. I stepped away from the door, my mind racing. Maybe he was just a solicitor or some delivery person, though I doubted it. This was Chicago. People didn't just drop by unannounced, especially not at this hour. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police if needed. But then I heard a voice. "Kelly, I know you're in there." My blood ran cold. The voice was calm, collected, but there was a hard edge to it, a sense of familiarity that I couldn't shake. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me like a slap in the face. It was Kim. Trevor had somehow found a way to get to me, even after everything. I felt my hands start to tremble as I clutched the phone tighter. Was he alone? How had he gotten out? Was this part of some bigger scheme? Or was it just him, standing there, taunting me once again? The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. I couldn't think clearly. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I couldn't. The voice at the door was a reminder of just how much I had underestimated him. He was out there, and he was not going to stop until he got what he thought was his. I took another shaky breath, forcing myself to calm down. My pulse was racing, my thoughts jumbled, but I had to think. I couldn't let Trevor control the situation. Not anymore. I stepped back from the door, retreating to the small safe space in my apartment. It wasn't much, but it was something. I grabbed my phone, unlocking it with trembling fingers. The screen blinked to life, and I quickly dialed Margaret's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Kelly, what's wrong?" "He's here," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. "He's outside my door." Margaret's voice turned hard. "Stay calm. You're going to be okay. Just don't engage with him. I'm calling the police now. You've got security, right?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely audible. "But he knows where I live. He found me." "I know. That's why we need to get you out of there. Get to the back exit. I'm on my way. Don't make a sound. Get out of sight." I didn't argue. I didn't want to argue. Margaret's calm, steady voice was a lifeline, a small comfort in the storm. I hurriedly grabbed my purse and backed toward the hallway that led to the rear door. My heart thundered in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the door, I heard the voice again, closer this time. "You can't hide from me forever, Kelly." His voice was taunting, casual, like we were old friends, like this was just another game to him. I reached the back door, fumbling with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see his face through the peephole, but it was just the dark hallway. Kelly," Trevor called out again, this time louder, his voice filled with sickening sweetness. "You don't want to do this. You're only making it harder on yourself." I threw open the door. The cold night air hit my face, and I stumbled outside, my heart in my throat. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran. I didn't know how long I ran for, how far I had gone. But when I finally stopped, gasping for breath in a dimly lit alleyway, the realization hit me like a wave. I had escaped. For now. But Trevor wasn't finished, and he wouldn't stop until he had everything he wanted. The courtroom was nearly full, yet a tense silence hung in the air. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped on my lap, my heart beating slow and steady. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Today, it would all finally end. Trevor sat at the defendant's table, dressed in an expensive suit that no longer concealed his haggard appearance. Dark circles under his eyes, nervous twitching fingers. He looked broken, but what struck me the most was the expression on his face. Not anger, not hatred, but fear. Beside me, Margaret sat with a steely, merciless gaze. She had won many cases like this before, but this one was different. She wasn't just defending me, she was dismantling the man who had tried to destroy my life. The judge spoke, and the room fell still. Trevor Reeves is found guilty of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. He is sentenced to 12 years in prison. This was what I had fought for. Trevor shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "It's all her," he shouted, turning toward me. "You wanted to take everything, but don't think you've won. I'll be back." I didn't look away. "No, Trevor," I said quietly but firmly. "You've already lost." The courtroom doors swung open, and the guards led him away. He was no longer the untouchable man who had controlled the lives of others. Now he was just a convicted criminal. As he passed me, his lips trembled. Maybe he wanted to say something else. Maybe he finally realized it was truly over. But I didn't care. A month after the trial, I moved into my new home. A spacious apartment that, by law, now belonged to me. I stood by the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about everything I had endured to get here. I had won. Margaret came over for a housewarming celebration, bringing a bottle of expensive wine. We drank to new beginnings. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought for a moment. Had I expected euphoria? Maybe. But in truth I just felt complete. Free, I answered, and it was the absolute truth. That same evening I received a letter. It had come from the prison, from Trevor. I didn't open it. I simply tossed the envelope into the fire and watched as the paper ignited and crumbled into ash. Some doors are better left closed forever. His name is now just a whisper in the past, and I will never look back.